In the previous module, we had read that Julie and the narrator were all set to leave the party as it was quite late at night. Now let's read what happens. When we were outside, I said, "Where do you live, Julie?" So now they have left the party already, and outside the Kapadia's house, when they were walking back their home, the narrator asks Julie that where she lives. At Wolfsburn, she said, right at the top of the hill. So she tells the address of her home, and the name of her house is Wolfsburn, and it's right at the top of the hill. Why at the top of the hill? It was a hilly area, as we have already discussed. There's a cold wind, I said, and although your dress is beautiful, it doesn't look very warm. Here, you'd better wear my overcoat. I've plenty of protection. So, as we already know that the narrator is quite a gentleman, and outside there's a cold wind, and Julie is wearing a dress which isn't very warm. So he offers her his overcoat to protect her from the cold. He says, "You'd better wear my overcoat. I've plenty of protection." And if you would remember, we had read that he had worn so many layers before leaving for the party as it was cold outside. She did not protest. Julie did not refuse. She accepted his offer of taking his overcoat and allowed me to slip my overcoat over her shoulders. The narrator places his overcoat over Julie's shoulders. Then we started out on the walk home, but I did not have to escort her all the way. They started walking home beside each other, and he didn't have to escort her all the way. Means he didn't have to go along with her to drop her home all the way. Escort means to go with someone else. At about the spot where we had met, she said, "There's a shortcut from here. I'll just scramble up the hillside." So they had met at a point, and when they had reached at that point, Julie said to him that he didn't have to escort her and she would manage going her home all by herself. She says, "There's a shortcut from here. I'll just scramble up the hillside." So she tells the narrator that why he didn't have to escort, because she would be climbing up the hill now and he didn't have to escort her. That climb is a shortcut to her place, and she'd just scramble up. Means she'd use her hands and feet to climb up that hill to reach her place. The narrator is quite surprised, and he wants to be sure that Julie is going to be safe and is going to be able to manage climbing up that hillside all by herself at this time of the night. So he asks her, "Do you know it well?" "It's a very narrow path." "Oh, I know every stone on the path. I use it all the time. And besides, it's a really bright night." So Julie tells him that she is familiar with that path. She knows every stone on that path, which means that she's quite used to that path, and she has taken that path quite many a time before as well, which means that she's used to climbing up that hillside. And she tells him that I use it all the time, and besides, it's a really bright night. The moon was shining brightly, so nighttime wouldn't be much of a problem, as the path would be quite visible due to bright moonlight. And the narrator tells her to keep the coat on. "Well, I keep the coat on," I said. "I can collect it tomorrow." So he tells her that he can take the coat from her tomorrow. She should keep the coat. She hesitated for a moment, then smiled and nodded. Julie hesitated for a while to keep that coat, but then she nodded. She gave her approval by nodding her head and she smiles. She then disappeared up the hill and I went home alone. So Julie climbed up the hill and within no time she had disappeared. Within no time she had climbed up the hill and went up towards her home. And then the narrator also went towards his home. The next day I walked up to Wolfsburn. So the next day the narrator goes to Wolfsburn. Why? Because he had to take his overcoat back. I crossed a little brook. Brook is a small narrow stream, a small narrow river. So he crossed a little brook from which the house had probably got its name. So the name of the brook was Wolfsburn, and maybe because of that brook the house had got its name. That house was also called as Wolfsburn. And entered an open iron gate. The iron gate of the house was already open, but of the house itself little remained. He says that there was not much left of that house. That house was ruined, it was shattered, it was broken down. There wasn't much left of the house. There was little remaining. Just a roofless ruin. A pile of stones, a shattered chimney, a few Doric pillars where a veranda had once stood. So there wasn't much left of the house, there wasn't a roof. All you could see was a pile of stones. The chimney was broken down into pieces, it was shattered, and a few Doric pillars where a veranda had once stood. So in place of veranda, there were only a few Doric pillars left of that house. So all of these things tell us that the house was totally a ruin. Now this is quite surprising because Julie gave this address to the narrator that she lived here. Now that he has reached here, he realizes that this place isn't worthy of living. So was it a joke? Why did she say that she'll live at Wolfsburn when it's a total ruin?